could possibly assist with. I don't know. Perhaps we can have a little more time, and Mr. Tyson, you and Mr. Bartolomucci can think about it and see if there's a proposal or a good way to work it out within that structure. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for anyone on the phone on this topic?
Madam Chair.
Delegate Simon?
Delegate Simon here. I just want to, maybe a question for everybody or comment. I continue to be a little bit concerned about the direction this is going. Because what I've heard is that the Republicans have hired Chris Jones, map drawer from 2011, who's a gerrymandering mastermind, and that's what he does for a living. We've hired somebody from Florida and Arizona who've worked with commissions on trying to come up with fair maps. And to the extent that this has become an adversarial process, and I say that not in the sense that we're fighting with each other, but there are two sort of ways to come to consensus, right? You can collaborate together, or you can say, you go do your best argument for your side, we'll do our best argument for our side, and then we come together. That's sort of our criminal system, right? It's adversarial, but we hope to get to the truth that way. And so to the extent that we've decided to adopt an adversarial approach to coming to a middle ground on this and hiring two lawyers, hiring two map drawers, and everything we've done, I'm a little concerned that some of the Democrats and folks on this side of the aisle need to adjust our targets. Because if our target is a fair map, and the Republicans' target is the most Republican map they can get, and then we get an offer from Senator McDougal to meet in the middle again, we're not going to wind up where any of us want to be, and that's not going to be a fair outcome. So what makes, I guess my question to the map makers, what makes you a Republican map drawer versus a map drawer? To the Democrat, what makes you a Democratic map drawer versus just a map drawer? We were told that we couldn't do this with a neutral. There is no such thing as a neutral. So what is it that when you go in and you look at a map, what causes you to look at it differently from a Republican lens versus a Democratic lens? I'd love to hear an answer from both sets as to why they identify themselves as a Republican map drawer versus a Democratic map drawer or a neutral map drawer.
And Madam Chair, this is Greta Harris. In addition to what Delegate Simon just asked, then I would like Ms. Duchin to then also answer that question around the neutrality of what her lab does as well, and how that could be helpful to us with the current construct that we have right now in this commission.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
All right, Delegate Simon, thank you for the question. I'll let Mr. Morgan speak to it. I just wanted to clarify for the commission at the outset that Mr. Morgan obviously is working for several commissions this cycle. He is not doing work just exclusively for partisan entities, so I think that's an important point. I suspect the answer is going to be largely like a lot of us. I consider myself a Republican election lawyer because I got my start in Republican politics. I'm not sure it's necessarily a hugely different way of looking at it, but that's would be me. And Mr. Morgan, you want to address Delegate Simon's question?
Sure. Delegate Simon, yes, I've worked in other states. I'm currently working on the Michigan Independent Redistricting Commission as part of the team there, where they hired Election Data Services, which is a fairly well-known Democratic firm, and I partnered with Kim Brace, who's the leader of that firm. So I'm working with him and the commission in Michigan. I will also, I believe, be hired by the New Jersey Redistricting Commission. I've worked with the Pennsylvania Redistricting Commission, the Connecticut Redistricting Commission. I've also worked in county commissions. For example, in North Carolina, I drew the Wake County School Districts, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina. And in that capacity, I worked with all members of the staff as directed by the attorneys. And in this particular role, I expect that I would be working for the attorneys as directed. And if, for example, Mr. Tyson wants me to work with the Democratic members, I'm happy to do that. I will be happy to work with the guidelines that the attorneys suggest and that the commission provides to the attorneys.
I would ask Mr. Strassman to start us off by talking about what it's like to be a redistricting expert for one particular party versus another, as opposed to, as Delegate Simon put it, just a map drawer. So, Mr. Strassman?
Thank you. So we have experience with both hats. Currently, we're leading a bipartisan team that's doing the California redistricting with a very independent lens. We're also the consultants for the Democratic House Caucus in Ohio, where we're approaching it. They're in the minority, and we're trying to come up with the sort of, I guess, what you would call a Democratic plan alternative, knowing that it has to be negotiated because their commission requires consensus from both parties, as does the Virginia Commission. In terms of what makes a Democratic map or a Democratic map drawer, we would take our direction from the commission, and if the commission has the setup of having a Democratic firm and a Republican firm, my understanding is we would be taking direction from the Democratic members. But in general, the criteria that the state has spelled out are fairly clear. Both the criteria and the order in which they are considered. And so I would see our role as drawing a plan that best meets those criteria. I would echo what Mr. Simon had said about being concerned about negotiating with ourselves. I think if you task the two map drawers with trying to come up with a consensus map and then bring it to the commission, there's potential for considerable gamesmanship there. I think we can draw a set of plans, as I'm sure our Republican counterparts can, and make the case for those. If I know that there is a concept of coming up with areas that we agree on. If the commission's direction was to try to not change plans for districts or change lines for districts that were fairly close to the ideal population already, those could well be consensus starting points. But there's a lot of interpretation of criteria is in the eye of the beholder, and we would see our role as drawing the plans that best meet those criteria, and then providing as much documentation as possible for the commission. For example, one of the criteria is compactness, but there is not a specific measure listed. There are multiple measures of compactness that are used in redistricting. So we would provide all of those measures, and the commission would be able to compare any sets of plans that came in based on those. Similarly with splitting of counties and minor civil divisions. But I guess I would fall back on my first point that we would work at the direction of the commission and council. So we would look to you for guidance on how we would proceed and what we should prioritize.
Thank you. Delegate Simon, since I probably had more experience on, at least in terms of longevity, than anyone else, let me just say that once an expert draws a map for a particular side in a lawsuit or independently or for a particular political party, it isn't necessarily that they get identified with that party, but once somebody in the next round is looking for somebody to draw maps, they look back and they say, who drew maps for the Democrats there or Republicans there? And they have a tendency to use them again, and I think that's how you get aligned. Professor Duchin is on the phone, and I know that Ms. Co-Chair Harris wanted to hear from her, so I'll cede to her. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I'll just take a moment to speak to how I think the work that we do is quite neutral with respect to partisan aims, and how I think it can be helpful in this process in Virginia as it's unfolding. So you just heard Ken Strasman say that criteria, even when they're named, can really be in the eye of the beholder. And I'm a professor of mathematics, and my work in this sphere has been partly to take those criteria away from eye of the beholder status and into a kind of operational and quantifiable realm. Once folks can agree on how to measure something, then it's possible to create maps that are comparable by those criteria, right? So you need to make something quantitative and you need to agree on measures, and then you can compare. So to be extremely, precise about a possible contribution here, often when faced with drawing a new map, one either starts from an empty page or from the previously enacted maps. And contribution of the algorithmic techniques is that there are many, many other starting points. So once you agree, at least tentatively, on how to measure county splitting, yes, there's more than one way. How to measure compactness, yes, I agree, there's more than one way. Once you agree on measurements, you can produce maps that are interesting by the lights of those criteria. And those can be your starting points for what's ultimately going to be a very human process because you know your state very well. Happy to answer further questions about any of that, but I hope that at least gives a flavor of how mathematics and computing can really help kind of adjudicate the contributions that come out of a process that we hope won't be adversarial, but will certainly involve contributions from all sides.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the committee? Yes, Senator Barker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment and make sure that both sides agree in terms of how we deal with the issue of what makes someone a Republican map drawer, what makes someone a Democratic map drawer, and what are the responsibilities that go along with that. And it seems to me the major thing that I would think would be what we would look at here is what's in the code, which says a map of districts shall not, when considered on a statewide basis, unduly favor or disfavor any political party. And it seems to me it's going to be the Republican responsibility of the Republican map drawer to make sure that Republicans are not unduly disfavored in drawing the maps, and the Democratic map drawer would be doing the same type of thing. And if we end up with Moon working with us, then we'll also have someone else who can sort of provide balance from both sides. And I think that's how we can come together on things so that we have something that the vast majority of people can support. Is that reasonable there to anyone, or does anyone have any objections to that? So.
I certainly think it's reasonable, and we look forward to collaborating with the other side.
That's Mr. Hebert.
I'm sorry, Jerry Hebert, yes, apologize for that. And we think that's a reasonable goal, and we intend to work towards that end. Our relationship so far has been very cooperative with legal counsel, and we look forward to extending that to map drawers.
And Brian Tyson for the Republican side, Senator, I think that as Delegate Simon flagged, the adversarial process is what we use as lawyers to try to get at what's true in a courtroom. And so I think having each side looking out for their own interests is going to be helpful in that process. And so I agree that that's a good way to approach it.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Kumar?
I agree that Delegate Simon has some good points about how this might be approached and who's starting at a point of fairness versus partisanship. I mean, it's hard to be collaborative unless people kind of say what their interests are from the get-go, and I feel like there's a lot of us on the commission that haven't done that. I mean, if we all put our cards on the table, people were to say, hey, I'm here to protect incumbents, I'm here to protect my majority, we might know. And everything we've talked about so far this morning has been about partisanship and protecting the political parties. There's another layer of nuance beyond what Delegate Simon said, and that's looking out for the people. I mean, we don't register as parties in Virginia, right? And so there's a lot of people in Virginia that would like to be less partisan than they are, but they can't because of gerrymandering. And what we're talking about doing here is basically not too distant from what we've done in the past, which is what people have fundamentally and overwhelmingly told us they want something different. And so, we're sitting up here saying, well, okay, fine, this is the process we have. But again, it doesn't have to be this way, because what I hear, even from us as citizens, the citizen members on the commission, is talking about the Democrats and the Republicans. But there is also the way forward that looks more from the people. And so we're not just talking about parties here, we're also talking about incumbents. And that's a big piece of this, because both the Democrats and the Republicans have a interest in protecting the incumbents, but that's also not what the people are saying they want. And so as we make these decisions about how we're going to do this work, just saying it's fair between Democrats and Republicans isn't good enough.
Is there anything,
Madam Chair, this is
Ms. Harris?
Madam Chair. This is Greta Harris.
Go ahead.
I would just reiterate what Mr. Kumar just stated, that for many of us that are citizen members of the commission, the whole goal and desire to even serve on the commission was to lift up shared democratic principles of fairness in this redistricting process. And so certainly while I was not in favor of separate council and definitely not with separate map drawers, this is where we find ourselves. And I wonder if and I am thrilled that Ms. Duchin is on the call, and I realize that some of our commission members may not see her lab as neutral, but I do, and that the work that I have looked at that her lab does really tries to strip out the partisan nature that is so can be so prevalent in any redistricting process, and just lets the numbers talk for themselves based on criteria that a commission has put forward. And it sounds as though there's more detailed definitions around compactness and how we're going to split independent localities or entities. And so that would be great to go a little bit deeper in our criteria. But I almost feel I would be thrilled, as I do think that citizens would be happy, if we strip the politics out of what we're about to begin, have Ms. Duchin's lab give us, just let the numbers speak for themselves based on our criteria, and then we begin working with each of the partisan map drawers as we go forward. But we are doing work on behalf of the citizens of Virginia and not the various parties that make up our legislative leadership.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. And that would be I think that's a very good segue into our discussion about the starting point for map